They say love doesn't fade with age, and maybe that's true. But when my summer at the lake began, I thought those feelings, desire, hope, connection, were buried in the past, preserved alongside memories of my husband Robert. After his death, life settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm. Days of solitude, of tending to gardens and books, of reflecting on a life that, while fulfilling, felt like a chapter long since closed. Then he arrived, my husband's nephew, Lucas. He was supposed to be a familiar presence, someone there to help me get through the summer, repairing loose boards and tackling the long list of forgotten maintenance tasks Robert had always handled. And yet, from the moment he stepped through the door, I could sense something shifting. Something stirring within me that I thought I'd put to rest. The summer days stretched on, filled with laughter, shared secrets, and moments I hadn't felt in years. And then, just as everything began to feel like a secret world made for only us, my daughter arrived. Lily, with her watchful eyes and her own memories of this place, and her unspoken questions about what exactly was happening between me and the man who was once just a nephew. Looking back, I wonder how I let myself be swept up, how a single summer could change everything. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that time does little to bury the past. And now, as I sit on this quiet shore, I wonder if what we shared was a gift, or if I made the worst mistake of my life. The cabin at the lake had always been a place of memories. Every summer, Robert and I would spend weeks here, escaping from the rest of the world. It was a small, simple place, nestled between pines and overlooking the peaceful, glistening water. And even now, a year after Robert's passing, the cabin held traces of him. His favorite coffee mug, the books he'd left unfinished, the creaky deck he'd sworn to repair but never quite managed. When Lucas offered to help with repairs this summer, I'd been touched by his thoughtfulness. Robert's nephew, tenacious and kind-hearted, had always looked up to his uncle, and in some ways, he was a reminder of the man I'd loved for so many years. I welcomed the company, thinking it would be nice to have someone else around to fill the silence. Lucas arrived in the early morning, his truck pulling into the gravel driveway just as I poured my first cup of coffee. He stepped out, stretching his tall frame and flashing a grin that immediately brought warmth to my heart. He looked like Robert in small ways, his dark hair, his quick smile, the way he carried himself with confidence. "Aunt Grace," he called, waving as he grabbed his bags. "I hope you didn't start without me." I laughed, stepping onto the porch. "I wouldn't dare. There's enough work here for the both of us, trust me." Over the next few days, we fell into an easy rhythm. Lucas worked on the deck, while I managed small tasks inside the cabin, occasionally joining him outside to hand over tools or chat about his life back in the city. He told me about his new job, his friends, his plans for the future, his words filling the air with the vibrant energy of youth. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden light over the lake, we sat by the water's edge. We shared stories about Robert, his quirks, his stubbornness, the way he had a knack for making anyone laugh. Lucas's laughter came easily, but there was a depth to it, a shadow that spoke of his own grief. "He always talked about this place," Lucas said, his voice soft. "He loved it here. I guess that's why it feels important, being here with you." His words struck a chord, stirring memories I had thought were buried deep. "He would be so proud of you, Lucas, and he'd be grateful to see you here, helping out." We sat in silence, watching the gentle ripples of the lake. I felt a strange warmth, a sense of connection that was both comforting and unsettling. Lucas had grown up, his presence familiar yet different, and for the first time I wondered if I'd been too quick to dismiss my own desire for companionship. It was just a fleeting thought, one I quickly brushed aside. But as I looked at Lucas, his face illuminated by the fading light, I felt a flicker of something unexpected. A longing, a yearning I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was nothing, that it was only the bittersweet nostalgia of the moment. But deep down, I knew that something had shifted, and as the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that this summer would be different from any other. The days passed in a comfortable routine, filled with laughter, shared meals, and the satisfying creak of tools on wood as Lucas repaired the cabin deck. I found myself looking forward to our mornings together, when we'd share a quiet cup of coffee on the porch, watching the mist rise off the lake. I had never thought I'd feel this way again, this warmth that seemed to grow with each passing day. It felt innocent at first, a spark of happiness, a simple pleasure in another person's company. Lucas had always been like family, a nephew by marriage, someone I'd known since he was a child. But now, as he worked shirtless in the summer heat, his tanned skin glistening with sweat, I couldn't deny that there was more to my feelings than simple affection. One afternoon, as I handed him a glass of lemonade, our hands brushed, lingering a second too long. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. I quickly looked away, brushing it off as nothing, but the moment lingered, a quiet thrill that sent a rush of warmth through me. "Thanks, Aunt Grace," he said, his voice soft. "Of course," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the lake, and we sat in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I tried to ignore the fluttering in my chest, the way my heart seemed to beat a little faster whenever he was near. It was foolish, I told myself. This was Robert's nephew. I was a widow, nearly 70 years old. This was nothing more than a passing fancy, a momentary lapse in judgment. But as the days wore on, I found myself drawn to him more and more. We shared quiet conversations by the lake, discussing everything from his childhood memories to my years with Robert. Lucas listened intently, his gaze warm and understanding, and I felt a closeness with him that I hadn't experienced in years. One evening, after a long day of work, we sat on the porch, watching the stars blink to life in the darkening sky. Lucas poured us each a glass of wine, his hand brushing mine as he passed the glass. "To summer," he said, raising his glass with a smile. "To summer," I replied, clinking my glass against his. We drank in silence, the cool night air filled with the chirping of crickets and the soft lapping of water against the shore. I felt a warmth settle over me, a contentment I hadn't felt in years. I glanced at Lucas, his face illuminated by the glow of the cabin light, and for a moment I felt a strange urge to reach out, to touch his hand, to bridge the small space that separated us. But I held back, telling myself it was just the wine, just the loneliness playing tricks on my mind. Yet as we sat there, the silence filled with unspoken words, I couldn't shake the feeling that this summer was leading us somewhere unexpected, somewhere dangerous. It happened on a warm evening, with the sun casting a golden glow over the lake, turning the water into a shimmering canvas of orange and pink. Lucas and I had spent the day working on the deck, laughing and teasing each other over small things, sharing the kind of easy companionship that felt both natural and exhilarating. As the sun dipped lower, we sat on the porch steps, sipping lemonade and watching the colors dance on the water. I felt a contentment I hadn't known in years, a happiness that seemed too good to be true. And then, without thinking, I leaned over and kissed him. The kiss was soft, tentative, a gentle brush of lips that left me breathless. For a moment we both froze, our eyes wide with surprise and shock. I felt a rush of shame, a realization of what I had just done, of the line I had crossed. But then Lucas leaned in, his hand finding mine, and kissed me back. In that moment, the world seemed to disappear, leaving only the warmth of his touch, the sweetness of his lips, the intensity of the connection we shared. It was a moment of pure, undeniable emotion, a culmination of everything we'd been feeling, yet too afraid to admit. But as quickly as it began, reality crashed down around us. I pulled away, my heart racing, my mind reeling with the enormity of what had just happened. "Lucas, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me," I stammered, my voice shaking. He looked at me, his expression soft, understanding. "You don't have to apologize, Grace. We're both adults. We're just two people who care about each other." His words brought a strange comfort, a reassurance that perhaps this wasn't as wrong as it seemed. But as I looked at him, I knew that this kiss, this connection, was a secret we'd have to carry, a moment that would live only between us. And yet, as I lay in bed that night, reliving the feel of his lips on mine, I couldn't shake the thrill that had sparked in my chest. The sense that this summer was leading us somewhere I could never have imagined. The kiss we shared was like a spark that refused to fade. The following days were filled with unspoken words, lingering glances, and stolen moments that only intensified our connection. Every brush of his hand, every shared smile held a thrill, a forbidden promise that we dared not say aloud. Each day, Lucas and I fell deeper into a rhythm that was both thrilling and terrifying. We had crossed a line, and though part of me knew it was wrong, the happiness I felt with him was undeniable. There was an energy, a youthfulness in his presence that made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt since Robert was alive. We kept our relationship secret, knowing that even the slightest hint of our connection could spark questions, could unravel the delicate balance we had created. But the secrecy added a thrill to our moments together, as if we were the only two people in the world who shared this unspoken truth. One afternoon, after spending hours together on the lake in a small rowboat, we drifted back to the cabin, our laughter echoing across the water. As we tied up the boat, Lucas leaned in, his hand brushing against mine. I felt a rush of warmth, a sense of safety and excitement all at once. "Grace," he murmured, his voice soft, "do you ever wonder if maybe we were meant to find each other like this?" The question lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. I looked into his eyes, searching for the answer, but all I felt was a quiet certainty, a feeling that somehow, in the midst of grief and loneliness, I had found something I never expected. "Yes," I whispered, my heart pounding. "I think maybe we were." But even as the words left my lips, I felt a pang of guilt, a shadow of doubt that reminded me of the line we had crossed. This was Robert's nephew, someone who had once looked up to him as a father figure, and I was his widow. The connection we shared was as fragile as it was forbidden, and I knew that if anyone found out, it would shatter everything. And yet, as I looked into Lucas's eyes, I knew that I couldn't let him go. Not yet. One evening, as Lucas and I sat together on the porch, lost in quiet conversation, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered our peace. I looked up, my heart sinking as I recognized the familiar figure stepping out of the car, my daughter Lily. Panic surged through me. I hadn't expected her to come up to the cabin, and the sudden arrival threw everything into chaos. Lucas glanced at me, his face a mixture of surprise and worry as we both tried to process what this meant. "Mom," Lily called, her voice bright as she approached the porch. "I thought I'd surprise you. It's been too long since we spent some time together." I forced a smile, trying to hide the panic that threatened to surface. "Lily, this is such a surprise. I wasn't expecting you." She smiled, her gaze shifting to Lucas, who stood beside me, his expression carefully neutral. "And Lucas, I didn't realize you'd be here too." I felt the tension build as Lucas and I exchanged a quick glance. "He's been helping me with some repairs around the cabin," I said quickly, hoping to keep the conversation light. "It's been nice having some company." Lily nodded, her smile friendly, but her eyes sharp, as if she sensed there was more to the story. "Well, that's great, Mom. I thought I'd come spend a few days here with you. You don't mind, do you?" "Of course not," I replied, forcing myself to remain calm. "I'm glad to have you here." But as we settled into the evening, the air felt heavy with unspoken words, a tension simmering beneath the surface. I knew that Lily's unexpected arrival would complicate everything, that the secret Lucas and I shared would be harder to keep under her watchful gaze. And as the night wore on, I felt a sense of dread, a feeling that this summer was about to take a turn I couldn't control. With Lily's arrival, our peaceful days by the lake became a delicate dance of secrecy and restraint. Lucas and I maintained a safe distance, careful to avoid any gesture or glance that might hint at the truth. But I could feel the tension building, a quiet longing simmering between us that became harder to hide with each passing day. Lily, observant as ever, seemed to sense the shift. She watched us closely, her gaze lingering whenever Lucas and I exchanged a smile or shared a private joke. I told myself it was just my imagination, that she had no reason to suspect anything unusual. But the worry gnawed at me, a constant reminder that our secret was as fragile as a whispered promise. One afternoon, as I prepared lunch, Lily joined me in the kitchen, her tone casual as she spoke. "Mom, it's nice seeing you so happy. You seem different, more alive." I paused, her words striking a chord I hadn't expected. "Well, it's been a good summer. Having Lucas here has been helpful. It's kept me busy." She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "You've been spending a lot of time with him, haven't you?" The question felt loaded, her tone too casual to be innocent. I forced a smile, hoping to deflect her suspicion. "He's family, Lily, and after everything with your father, it's been nice having someone around who knew him, who remembers him." Lily's expression softened, but I could sense a lingering doubt in her eyes. I understand, Mom. I want you to be careful. Sometimes loneliness can make us see things that aren't really there. Her words stung. A veiled accusation that cut deeper than I cared to admit. I knew she was trying to protect me, to keep me from making choices I might regret. But as I looked into her eyes, I felt a pang of guilt, a reminder that I was keeping something from her. Something that, if discovered, would devastate our relationship. As Lily left the kitchen, I felt the weight of the secret pressing down on me, a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. And I knew that if I wasn't careful, everything I held dear would come crashing down around me. It was late in the evening. The sky painted with a blend of purples and deep blues as the sun disappeared over the horizon. Lily had gone to bed early, and Lucas and I found ourselves alone on the porch, the soft sounds of nature surrounding us in a cocoon of quiet. We sat in silence, our hands brushing as we leaned against the porch railing, savoring the moment of peace. It felt risky, daring, but I couldn't help myself. Being close to him felt like a balm, a comfort I couldn't deny. But then, just as I leaned in, drawn by the warmth of his presence, a sound broke the silence, a creak from the cabin, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps. I pulled back, my heart racing as Lily appeared in the doorway, her expression one of curiosity and faint suspicion. "Mom, Lucas?" she asked, her tone neutral yet tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "What are you two doing out here?" I struggled to keep my voice steady, feeling the weight of her gaze on us. "Just enjoying the evening air, Lily. It's a beautiful night." She looked at us, her eyes narrowing slightly, as though she were piecing together a puzzle. "I see. Well, don't stay out too late. You'll catch a chill." As she turned back inside, I felt a rush of relief mixed with fear. We had come dangerously close to exposing ourselves, to revealing the truth we had fought so hard to keep hidden. Lucas squeezed my hand, his touch a silent reassurance, but I knew that our secret was becoming harder to keep. The risk was growing, the walls closing in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. The tension between me and Lily grew with each passing day, a silent undercurrent that neither of us dared to address. I could feel her watching me, her eyes sharp and searching, as if she were waiting for me to slip, to reveal something I wasn't ready to admit. Finally, one evening, as we sat together in the living room, the tension came to a head. Lily looked at me, her expression unreadable, her voice steady as she spoke. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." I felt my heart sink, knowing what was coming but powerless to stop it. "Of course, Lily. You can ask me anything." She took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. "Is there something going on between you and Lucas?" The question hung in the air, a sharp, unforgiving blade that cut through the silence. I looked away, my mind racing, searching for words that would explain, that would justify what I'd done. But as I opened my mouth to speak, I realized there was no way to soften the truth, no way to make her understand the complexity of my emotions. "Yes," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "There is." Lily's face fell, a mixture of shock, hurt, and anger flashing in her eyes. "How could you, Mom? He's family, Dad's nephew. This is a betrayal." I felt the weight of her words, the judgment in her tone cutting deep. "Lily, I didn't plan this. I was lonely. After your father passed, there was a void, and Lucas, he filled that void, in a way I didn't expect." But my explanation did little to soften her anger. She stood up, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I can't believe you, Mom. I thought you were better than this. I don't even know who you are anymore." And with that, she left the room, leaving me alone in the wake of her words. The painful realization that my choices had cost me the one relationship I had always cherished above all others. The silence in the cabin was suffocating after Lily stormed out. I could hear the slam of her bedroom door echo through the quiet, followed by the heavy stillness that settled over everything. The weight of my decision hung in the air, filling every corner of the cabin with an oppressive tension. I felt as though the walls themselves were closing in, pressing down on me with the full force of my mistake. Lucas came to find me later, his expression etched with worry. He sat beside me on the couch, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder, but even his presence felt different, more a reminder of the trouble we'd caused than the solace he once brought me. "What happened?" he asked softly, his eyes searching mine. "She knows," I replied, my voice breaking. I couldn't lie to her anymore. I told her the truth about us. The words hung between us, a confession I hadn't wanted to speak out loud. Lucas looked down, his face a mix of guilt and sadness as he processed the reality of our situation. "I'm sorry, Grace," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I didn't want this to hurt anyone." Neither did I. Yet here we were, sitting in the ruins of a summer that had once felt so full of possibility, now overshadowed by the weight of our secret. I knew that we had reached a point of no return, that our choices had led us to a place where there was no easy path forward. "Maybe." I hesitated, my voice trembling. "Maybe we should stop this. For Lily's sake. For all our sakes." The pain in Lucas's eyes was unmistakable, but he nodded, understanding. "If that's what you want, I care about you, Grace. But I'll respect whatever decision you make." A tear slipped down my cheek as I took his hand, feeling the bittersweet weight of what we were saying. Letting him go was like letting go of the part of me that had come alive again this summer, a part of me I wasn't ready to bury. But I knew that if I wanted to mend things with Lily, I had to put her first. I had to make the difficult choice, to let go of something beautiful for the sake of someone I loved even more. The morning felt surreal, each action weighted with the knowledge that it was our last day together. Lucas and I moved in silence, packing up his belongings, our unspoken goodbye heavy in the air. I kept glancing at him, memorizing every detail, his thoughtful expression, the warmth in his eyes, the kindness that had drawn me to him in the first place. We didn't need to say much. The understanding between us was clear. This was the end of a chapter we had written together, one that had been filled with moments of laughter and connection, but also shadows of regret. As he packed the last of his things into his truck, he turned to me, his gaze soft and filled with sorrow. "Thank you, Grace," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "For everything." I managed a small smile, my heart aching as I replied. "No, thank you, Lucas. You reminded me that there's still life to live. You helped me feel like myself again." We stood there, the silence between us both comforting and excruciating. And then he leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. It was a goodbye kiss, filled with all the words we couldn't say, all the things we couldn't be. As he drove away, I watched his truck disappear down the winding road, feeling a hollow ache settle in my chest. I had chosen to let him go, and in doing so, I had chosen to mend the fractures in my relationship with Lily. But the price felt steep, and I couldn't shake the feeling that part of me had been left on that road, driving away with him. When Lily emerged later that morning, her face was set in a hard expression, her eyes wary and guarded. She had spent the night in silence, processing the confession I had laid bare, and I knew that whatever she had to say would be difficult to hear. She sat down across from me, her posture rigid, a wall between us that hadn't been there before. I waited, my heart pounding as I braced myself for the conversation I knew was coming. "Mom," she began, her voice cold, "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this. You betrayed Dad's memory, our family, everything I thought you stood for." The accusation cut deep, each word a reminder of the shame I felt. But I didn't argue. I knew that she had every right to her anger, that my actions had hurt her in ways I hadn't considered. "I'm sorry, Lily," I replied softly, my voice filled with regret. "I never meant to hurt you. I was lonely, and Lucas, he filled a void I didn't know was there. It doesn't excuse anything, but I need you to understand that it wasn't about betraying your father. It was about finding a part of myself that I thought was gone." Lily's gaze softened slightly, but her expression remained guarded. "I understand loneliness, Mom, but that doesn't change what you did. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. And if you want any chance of rebuilding our relationship, you need to make sure this thing with Lucas is over." I nodded, feeling the weight of her ultimatum settle over me. "It is over, Lily. I promise. He's gone." She looked at me, searching my eyes for the truth, before nodding slowly. "I'll try, Mom. I'll try to forgive you. But it's going to take time." Her words brought a flicker of hope, a promise that perhaps one day we could find our way back to each other. But I knew that the path ahead would be long, filled with moments of regret and difficult conversations. And as I sat there, watching her leave the room, I felt both relief and sorrow, knowing that my choice had cost me something precious. But that, perhaps, it had also saved something even more valuable. With Lucas gone and Lily's guarded forgiveness, life at the cabin took on a quieter, somber rhythm. The lake, once filled with laughter and stolen glances, now felt like a mirror of my solitude, a reminder of the choices I had made. I spent my days reflecting, piecing together fragments of memories from my years with Robert, trying to reconcile the love I had shared with him with the new feelings I had discovered this summer. One evening, I took out a journal, writing a letter to Robert. It was something I hadn't done in years, but the words flowed easily, as though he were sitting right beside me. "Dear Robert," I began, the pen shaking slightly as I poured out my heart. "I wonder what you would think of all this. Of the choices I made, of the love I found in your nephew. I hope you would understand that it wasn't about replacing you. It was about finding myself again in a way I didn't know was possible." The letter was filled with apologies and gratitude, a confession of the feelings I had kept buried for so long. I thanked him for the years we had shared, the love he had given me, and the memories that still lingered in every corner of the cabin. But I also asked for his forgiveness, for the ways in which I had strayed from the path we had once walked together. As I finished the letter, a sense of peace settled over me. It was as though, in writing those words, I had finally found a way to bridge the past and the present, to accept both the love I had shared with Robert and the brief connection I had found with Lucas. In the weeks that followed, Lily and I took small steps toward rebuilding our relationship. We spoke about the difficult emotions we had both experienced, the betrayal and hurt that had lingered between us. I opened up to her in ways I hadn't before, explaining the loneliness that had led me to Lucas, the ways in which his presence had helped me heal. At first her responses were cautious, hesitant, but gradually I saw a softness return to her gaze, a willingness to listen without judgment. Our conversations were filled with tears, moments of understanding, and the quiet forgiveness that only comes from shared vulnerability. One afternoon as we walked along the shore, Lily reached out, taking my hand. "Mom, I still don't understand everything. But I know you're human, that you have your own needs and your own pain. I can't promise that I'll ever fully be okay with what happened, but I can promise to try." Her words brought a rush of gratitude, a sense of relief that we were finally moving toward healing. I squeezed her hand, my heart swelling with love and a renewed sense of hope. "Thank you, Lily," I whispered, my voice filled with emotion. "That's all I could ever ask for." The summer came to an end, and with it, my time at the cabin. The memories of Lucas lingered, woven into the fabric of the place, but I knew that I had to let them go. It was time to close this chapter, to move forward with the lessons I had learned, the love I had felt, and the peace I had found in my decision. I packed up the cabin, placing Robert's favorite books and coffee mug in a box, feeling a bittersweet ache as I prepared to leave. The lake, once filled with so many memories, now felt like a place of healing, a reminder of the love and loss that had shaped me. Lily came to help me pack, her presence a comforting reminder that despite everything, we had found our way back to each other. As we locked up the cabin for the last time, I felt a sense of closure, a release from the weight of the past and an openness to whatever lay ahead. "Are you ready, Mom?" Lily asked, her voice gentle. I looked at her, feeling a newfound strength, a quiet resilience. "Yes, Lily, I'm ready." And as we drove away from the lake, leaving the cabin and its memories behind, I felt a sense of peace, a knowledge that I had finally found the courage to live life on my own terms, carrying both the love I had lost and the love I had discovered with grace and gratitude. Months later, as I settled into a new routine back home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The cabin, once a place of both memories and mistakes, had become a symbol of the resilience and growth I had discovered within myself. I kept in touch with Lily, our relationship growing stronger with each conversation, each shared moment of understanding. Looking back, I knew that the summer had been a turning point, a time of both heartbreak and healing, of lessons learned and love rediscovered. and though there were still moments of regret, I carried them lightly, knowing that I had faced my mistakes with honesty, had chosen love even when it was difficult, and had emerged stronger for it. As I sat in the quiet of my new home, watching the sun set over the horizon, I felt a sense of calm, a quiet certainty that life, with all its twists and turns, had led me exactly where I was meant to be. You might think life is set in stone when you're in your mid-50s. I certainly did. I thought I knew where I stood as a wife, a stepmother, and a woman. But life has a way of throwing surprises at you. Ones you never see coming. Ones you can never prepare for. My name is Eleanor, though most call me Ellie. I've been married to Richard for 15 years, and I've raised his son, Damien, since he was a teenager. Damien. Even now, saying his name makes me pause. He's 26 now, tall, confident, with sharp features and a presence that fills any room. I was proud of the man he'd become, but that day at the mall changed everything. It started with a simple favor. Damien needed a few new suits for work, and Richard was out of town as usual. "Why don't you come with me?" I'd suggested. "I know what looks good on you." I hadn't meant anything by it at the time, but looking back, maybe some part of me knew. The mall was unusually lively for a weekday afternoon, its wide halls humming with chatter and the occasional laugh echoing off polished floors. I'd expected a quieter outing, something simple and quick. But as we stepped into the upscale boutique, Damien at my side, I could tell this was going to be more of an adventure than I'd planned. Damien scanned the racks with a practiced, indifferent air, his hands sliding over the neatly arranged suits. He had a knack for looking composed no matter the situation, a trait that sometimes unnerved me. He carried himself like someone older than his 26 years, and lately I'd found myself noticing it more than I should. "I don't even know where to start," he said, glancing at me with a wry smile. "That's what I'm here for," I replied, stepping ahead of him. "You'd end up in the same black suit you already own if I let you shop alone." He chuckled softly. "Isn't black supposed to be timeless?" "Timeless, yes. Interesting, no." I pulled a deep blue jacket off the rack and held it up to him. "Try this." He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue, draping the jacket over his arm. I knew Damien trusted my judgment. He always had, even when he was a moody teenager, reluctantly letting me help him pick out school clothes. Back then, I'd been the patient, pragmatic stepmom, the one who smoothed out the rough edges in his relationship with his father. But now, things felt different. Damien disappeared into a fitting room while I continued browsing, pulling a few more options from the racks. When I returned to the dressing area, the attendant looked flustered, juggling a stack of clothes while gesturing toward a line of occupied rooms. "Sorry, ma'am," she said. "We're completely full. It might be a few minutes." "That's fine," I replied, glancing toward Damien's stall. "I'm just bringing these to I paused, to my son." The word felt strange on my tongue, even though I'd said it 100 times before. I knocked lightly on his door. "Damien, I've got a couple more for you." The door cracked open and his face appeared. Perfect timing. I was about to come out anyway. He stepped back to let me in, taking the hangers from my hand. "Ellie, you don't have to." "It's crowded," I interrupted, brushing past him. "And I'm not standing out there like a pack mule while you take your time." The space was tight, barely enough room for the two of us to maneuver around each other. Damien shrugged, unbothered, and turned his back to me as he slipped out of his shirt. I tried not to look, keeping my focus on the rack of clothes in front of me, but the mirror betrayed me. His reflection caught my attention, unguarded and sharp. His shoulders, broad and well-defined, tensed slightly as he slid the jacket on. The fabric fit him perfectly, hugging his frame in a way that was both professional and undeniably striking. "Well?" he asked, turning to face me. I snapped out of my thoughts, stepping forward to adjust the lapels. "It's good. A little snug in the shoulders, though." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Damien smiled, watching me as I smoothed the fabric. "You've got an eye for this stuff. No wonder Dad lets you pick out all his clothes." I froze for half a second at the mention of Richard. He'd been gone for weeks now, buried in another endless business trip. I pushed the thought aside and took a step back, avoiding Damien's gaze. "Try the blue one next," I said quickly, reaching for the hanger. He unbuttoned the jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. The air in the tiny room felt heavier somehow, and I realized too late that I was still standing directly in his way. "Ellie," he said, his voice softer now. "Yes." "You don't have to stay in here. I can manage." I should have left then. I knew it. But instead I smiled, a weak attempt to cover the awkwardness. "Someone has to make sure you don't look ridiculous." He laughed quietly, the sound low and rich. Then he stepped closer, brushing past me as he reached for the next jacket. The faintest hint of cologne lingered in the air between us, and for a moment, the noise outside the stall seemed to fade away. "Blue, huh?" he said, breaking the silence. "You sure about this one?" "It'll bring out your eyes," I said, immediately regretting how personal it sounded. Damien held my gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Then he slipped the jacket on, turning to face the mirror. "What do you think?" I forced myself to focus, stepping closer to adjust the cuffs. "It's good, really good." He looked at me then, not in the mirror but directly, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I never thanked you for everything you've done for me." "Damien." "I mean it," he continued. "You've always been there for me, more than my own mom ever was, and now, here you are, still taking care of me." His words sent a ripple through me, equal parts warmth and unease. I managed a weak smile. That's what family's for. For a moment, neither of us moved. The space between us felt smaller than ever, charged with something unspoken but undeniable. Then, as if on cue, a sharp knock on the door shattered the moment. "Everything okay in there?" the attendant called. I stepped back quickly, my cheeks burning. "Yes, we're fine," I said, my voice too bright. Damien smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "Guess we should wrap this up," he said, shrugging out of the jacket. "Right," I muttered, reaching for the hangers. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered the clothes. But I hoped he didn't notice. We left the fitting room a few minutes later, the tension still lingering like a shadow between us. As we made our way to the register, Damien walked a step closer than usual, his shoulder brushing mine. I told myself it was nothing, a simple coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. The drive home from the mall was unusually quiet. Damien sat beside me, his arm resting casually on the door, his eyes focused on the passing scenery. The rhythmic hum of the tires on asphalt should have been soothing, but instead, it left too much space for my thoughts to spiral. I tried to push aside the nagging weight of what had happened in the dressing room. Nothing really happened, I reminded myself. It was just a fleeting moment, one that meant more in my head than it had in reality. But no matter how I spun it, I couldn't shake the image of Damien's face, the way his eyes had held mine in that impossibly small space. "Ellie?" His voice jolted me, and I gripped the wheel tighter, clearing my throat. "Yes?" "You're awfully quiet. Usually you can't stop giving me grief about my driving when we're in the car." I forced a chuckle. "Maybe I'm just tired of fighting a losing battle." He smiled, that easy, disarming grin of his, and leaned back in his seat. "You know, I really do appreciate you coming with me today. I probably would have ended up with something boring if I'd gone alone." "You're welcome," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "I've got a reputation to uphold, after all. Can't have my stepson looking like he walked out of a thrift store." The light-hearted banter helped, but only for a moment. As we pulled into the driveway, the weight of home settled over me. Richard wouldn't be back until next week, which meant the house would be quiet, too quiet, for the next several days. I turned off the engine and glanced at Damien. "You can leave the bags in the car for now. I'll deal with them later." "Sure," he said, stepping out. I watched him for a moment as he stretched, the afternoon sun catching the sharp lines of his jaw and the hint of a smirk still playing on his lips. Then I shook my head, forcing myself to focus. Inside, the house felt cooler, the faint hum of the air conditioning breaking the silence. Damien headed upstairs, his footsteps echoing faintly on the wooden stairs. I busied myself in the kitchen, unloading groceries we'd picked up on the way home. It was a mindless task, exactly what I needed to settle my thoughts. But even as I arranged the fridge shelves and folded plastic bags, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in the dressing room. His voice, his closeness, the way my heart had betrayed me by pounding too hard, too fast. "Ellie?" I jumped, spinning around to find Damien leaning against the doorframe. His hair still damp from a quick shower. He'd changed into a simple t-shirt and jeans, but somehow he made even that look effortless. "You scared me," I said, laughing nervously. "Sorry," he said, though his smile suggested otherwise. "I was just wondering if you wanted to watch something later, a movie or whatever." It was such a simple request, but the casual intimacy of it caught me off guard. We'd spent time together like this before, of course, plenty of lazy evenings in front of the TV, but now, everything felt different. "Sure," I said finally. "Let me just finish up here." That evening, the two of us settled into the living room. Damien lounged on the couch, his long legs stretched out, while I curled up in the armchair with a glass of wine. He'd picked some action movie I'd never heard of, though I wasn't paying much attention to the plot. I told myself I was imagining things when he glanced my way more than usual, or when he shifted closer on the couch, leaving less space between us than before. Maybe I was just reading too much into everything, letting my guilt distort reality. But then he spoke, his voice soft enough to make me strain to hear him over the movie. "Ellie, can I ask you something?" I looked up, startled by the seriousness in his tone. "Of course." He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the screen before returning to me. "Earlier, at the mall, was everything okay?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. "Why wouldn't it be?" I said too quickly. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I don't know, you just seemed different, like something was bothering you." I laughed, a brittle sound that didn't quite reach my eyes. "I think you're imagining things." "Maybe," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe me. The air between us grew heavier, the room seeming smaller somehow. I felt his gaze linger on me, warm and searching, and I forced myself to focus on the screen, pretending to care about the explosions and gunfire. After a few minutes, Damien shifted again, this time leaning forward to rest his elbows on his knees. "You've always been there for me, Ellie," he said quietly. "More than anyone else. I hope you know how much that means to me." The sincerity in his voice sent a pang through me, and I set my glass down carefully, afraid my shaking hands might betray me. "I'm just doing what any parent would do," I said, keeping my tone light. "Not every parent," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at him then, unable to stop myself. His face was shadowed in the dim light, but his eyes were bright, steady, and too knowing. "I mean it," he said. "You've always been more than just my stepmom. You've always made me feel like I mattered." My heart twisted at his words, and for a moment I couldn't find my voice. When I finally spoke, it came out softer than I intended. "You do matter, Damien. You always have." The silence that followed was thick with things unsaid, a fragile tension that neither of us dared to break. Finally, I stood, clearing my throat. "It's late," I said, avoiding his gaze. "We should both get some sleep." Damien nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Good night, Ellie." "Good night." I turned and left the room, my steps quick and deliberate. But as I climbed the stairs and shut the door behind me, I couldn't stop the flurry of emotions that swept over me. Guilt, confusion, and something deeper, something I wasn't ready to name. I leaned against the door, my heart pounding in the quiet darkness. Whatever was happening between us, it wasn't something I could ignore. Not anymore. The days that followed were a quiet storm, filled with charged moments that never quite spilled over but left a trail of tension in their wake. Damien and I danced around each other in the house, our interactions polite on the surface, but underpinned with something I couldn't name or didn't want to. Richard called once during the week, his voice distant and rushed as usual. "Everything all right at home?" he asked, and I assured him it was. I didn't mention the way Damien lingered in the kitchen when I cooked, offering to help with things he'd never cared about before. I didn't tell him how I'd catch him watching me from across the room, his gaze steady and unflinching, or how I'd started wearing sweaters around the house to hide the heat that rose under his attention. I told myself it was nothing, a phase, some passing, whatever it was. But deep down, I knew better. One evening, about a week after the mall trip, Damien found me in the backyard, tending to the small herb garden I'd planted years ago. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn, and the air smelled faintly of basil and lavender. "You spend a lot of time out here," he said, stepping onto the patio. "It's peaceful," I replied without looking up. My hands were buried in the soil, the cool earth grounding me in a way nothing else could. He crouched beside me, his presence a solid weight in the soft twilight. "I never really got it before," he said, his voice low, "why you cared so much about this garden. But now—" He trailed off, running a hand over the leaves of a rosemary plant. I glanced at him, my heart catching at the way the fading light softened his features. "Now what?" He smiled faintly. "Now I think I understand. It's about having something that's yours, something you can nurture, even when everything else feels chaotic." I didn't know what to say to that. Instead, I focused on the soil, patting it down with more force than necessary. "You've been quiet lately," he said after a moment. "Have I?" I asked, though we both knew the answer. "Yeah. I miss when you tell me off for leaving my shoes by the door, or complain about how I never fold the laundry right." I laughed despite myself, shaking my head. "Maybe I'm just tired of nagging. Or maybe you're tired of pretending." The words hung between us, heavy and unspoken for far too long. I froze, my hands stilling in the dirt. "Damien, it's okay," he said quickly, his voice gentle. "You don't have to say anything. I wanted you to know that I notice. That I'm here." I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. He reached out then, his hand brushing against mine, and the warmth of his touch sent a shiver through me. I pulled back sharply, rising to my feet. "I should finish up here," I said, my voice too bright, too forced. "It's getting dark." Damien stood as well, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't press me, didn't try to stop me as I gathered my tools and hurried inside. But the weight of his gaze followed me, lingering long after I'd shut the door behind me. Later that week, the annual neighborhood barbecue rolled around, a loud, boisterous event hosted by the Johnsons down the street. Richard and I had attended every year since we moved into the neighborhood, but with him away, I debated skipping it altogether. "You should go," Damien said over breakfast that morning. "You've been cooped up in the house all week." "And what about you?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'll come with you," he said, surprising me. "It'll be nice to get out for a bit." That evening, we arrived at the barbecue together, the two of us navigating the crowd with practiced ease. The smell of grilled meat and the sound of laughter filled the air, and for a while, I managed to forget everything else. But as the evening wore on, I became increasingly aware of Damien's presence, how he stayed close to me, his arm brushing against mine as we moved through the yard, the way he seemed to shield me from the boisterous crowd without saying a word. At one point, Susan, my closest friend in the neighborhood, sidled up to me with a knowing smile. "Well, look at you," she teased, nodding toward Damien. "You've got yourself quite the bodyguard tonight." I laughed nervously, brushing off her comment. "He's just being polite." "Polite? Please. Half the women here are swooning and he hasn't taken his eyes off you all night." I forced a smile, though her words sent a flush of heat creeping up my neck. "You're imagining things." Susan shrugged, sipping her wine. "If you say so." By the time we returned home, the weight of the day had settled over me like a heavy blanket. Damien and I barely spoke as we walked inside, both of us lost in our thoughts. "Thanks for coming with me," I said finally, breaking the silence. "Anytime," he replied, his voice soft. I turned to head upstairs, but his voice stopped me. "Ellie." I looked back, my heart pounding. He was standing in the doorway, the dim light casting shadows across his face. "Yeah?" He hesitated, his expression unreadable. "Good night?" "Good night," I said, though the word felt inadequate, too small for everything unspoken between us. I climbed the stairs slowly, my steps heavy. But when I reached my room and shut the door behind me, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Something had shifted between us, something I couldn't undo. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop myself from wanting to see where it would lead. The sound of Richard's voice on the phone was the first sign that everything could fall apart. It was late afternoon, and I was in the living room with Damien. He was sprawled on the couch, flipping through a magazine, while I sat nearby with a cup of tea. The house felt calm, the kind of comfortable quiet I'd come to savor in Richard's absence. Then my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I didn't need to look at the screen to know it was him. His calls were always abrupt, unannounced, and timed just well enough to remind me of his presence, fleeting but ever looming. "Hi, Richard," I said, forcing my voice into a cheerful lilt as I answered. "Ellie, good news," he said without preamble. "The conference wrapped up early. I'm flying back tonight." I froze, my breath catching. "Tonight? I thought you weren't coming back until Friday." "There's no point in staying if everything's done. I'll be home by 10. Don't wait up." The line went dead before I could respond. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at it as though it might explain why my carefully constructed world was suddenly unraveling. Damien's voice broke the silence. "He's coming back, isn't he?" I looked at him, startled. "How did you?" "I could tell from your face," he said simply, sitting up. "Yes," I said, setting the phone down with trembling fingers. "He'll be here tonight." Damien leaned back against the cushions, his expression unreadable. "You don't seem thrilled." I hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's just unexpected. I wasn't prepared." "Neither was I," he murmured, his gaze steady on mine. The weight of his words settled between us, heavy and undeniable. I looked away, focusing on my tea, as if the swirling liquid might somehow provide clarity. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of half-hearted tidying and restless pacing. I told myself I was just cleaning for Richard's arrival, but I couldn't ignore the tension coiling tighter with each passing hour. Damien disappeared upstairs after dinner, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the ever-ticking clock. By the time Richard's car pulled into the driveway, my nerves were frayed to the point of snapping. I stood in the hallway, smoothing down my blouse, as the front door opened and he stepped inside. "Ellie," he said, setting down his briefcase, "you didn't have to wait up." "I couldn't sleep," I lied, forcing a smile. Richard looked older than I remembered, his features lined with exhaustion. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, the gesture mechanical and devoid of warmth. "Where's Damien?" he asked, glancing around the house. "Upstairs, I think," I replied. "He went to bed early." Richard nodded absently, already heading toward the kitchen. "I'll grab a drink and head to bed myself. We'll catch up tomorrow." "Of course," I said, relief flooding through me. But as I watched him disappear down the hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls around me were closing in. The real test came the next morning. Richard was up early, seated at the breakfast table with a mug of coffee and the newspaper. I moved around the kitchen, preparing his usual toast and eggs, while Damien lingered by the counter with his own cup of coffee. The tension was unbearable. Every glance, every movement felt magnified, as though Richard might somehow sense the invisible thread that now connected Damien and me. "So what's new around here?" Richard asked, glancing between us. "Not much," I said quickly, setting his plate in front of him. "Just the usual." He sipped his coffee, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Damien, have you been keeping your mother company while I've been gone?" The casual way he said "mother" made my stomach twist, though Damien remained unfazed. "Of course," he said smoothly, his tone light. "We went shopping, had a barbecue with the neighbors. Nothing too exciting." Richard nodded, seemingly satisfied, but I could feel Damien's gaze on me, a silent reminder of the secrets we now shared. It wasn't until later that afternoon that things nearly unraveled entirely. Richard had left for the office to catch up on work, leaving me and Damien alone in the house once more. I thought I'd finally have a moment to breathe, but fate had other plans. I was in the laundry room, sorting clothes, when I heard Richard's voice from the front hall. "Ellie?" I forgot my keys. My blood ran cold. I hadn't even heard the door open. "Coming," I called, my voice trembling as I dropped the clothes and rushed toward the sound. I rounded the corner to find him standing by the coat rack, rifling through his briefcase. Damien appeared at the top of the stairs just as I reached the hall, his expression calm, but his posture tense. "I thought you were at work," I said, forcing a laugh as I handed Richard his keys from the counter. "I was halfway there when I realized I left these," he said, holding them up. "Good thing I wasn't far." His gaze shifted to Damien, who was leaning casually against the banister now, his arms crossed. "What were you up to?" Richard asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "Just heading out," Damien said easily. "I've got some errands to run." Richard nodded, though his expression lingered on Damien a moment too long before he turned back to me. "You've been keeping busy, I see." "Always," I said with a brittle smile. He kissed my cheek again, then headed out the door without another word. As soon as the sound of his car faded, I exhaled sharply, leaning against the counter for support. That was close, I muttered. Damien descended the stairs, his movements slow and deliberate. Too close, he agreed, his voice low. I looked up at him, my heart still racing. Damien, we can't. We'll be careful, he interrupted, his tone steady. But I'm not walking away from this. His words sent a shiver through me, equal parts fear and something far more dangerous. I don't know if we can keep this up, I whispered, more to myself than to him. We will, he said simply, because we don't have a choice anymore. His confidence should have scared me, should have made me run, but instead it anchored me, pulling me deeper into a web I couldn't escape. And as I stood there, my pulse still pounding in my ears, I realized he was right. The weight of secrets has a way of changing the air around you. It turns something as ordinary as a glance or a passing touch into a loaded gesture. Every moment fraught with possibility and risk. I'd grown used to this over the past weeks, to the constant balancing act of maintaining appearances while navigating the turbulent undercurrent of my feelings. But nothing prepared me for the storm that night. It started innocently enough. Richard was working late again, locked away in his home office, the faint sound of his keyboard clacking through the closed door. Damien and I were in the living room, the television flickering in the background as we sat in companionable silence. At least it seemed like silence on the surface. In reality, the room was brimming with everything we weren't saying. I stole a glance at him from the corner of my eye. He was seated on the far end of the couch, his posture relaxed but his attention clearly elsewhere. The way he held himself, confident, unbothered, only made the knot in my chest tighten. Ellie, he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the stillness. I looked at him, startled. Yes? He hesitated, his expression shifting to something softer, more vulnerable. Are you happy? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. Why would you ask that? I finally said, my voice quieter than I intended. Because I've been watching you, he replied, and I don't think you are. I stared at him, my heart pounding. There it was again, the quiet, unshakable way he saw through me, as if he could peel back every layer of pretense I'd spent years constructing. Damien, I trailed off, searching for the right words. It's not that simple. Maybe it is, he said, shifting closer. Maybe you're just too afraid to admit it. The sound of Richard's office chair scraping across the floor startled both of us. I stood abruptly, smoothing down my blouse as if the motion could somehow erase the moment we'd just shared. I should, Ellie. Damien's voice was firm, steady, cutting through my excuses like a knife. I turned to face him, my heart racing. But before either of us could say anything more, Richard's voice called out from the hallway. Ellie, where's the file I left on the counter? It's in the kitchen, I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. Richard appeared a moment later, his brow furrowed in that way that made him look perpetually distracted. He didn't even glance at Damien as he retrieved the file and disappeared back into his office, the door closing with a muted thud. I exhaled slowly, the tension in the room thick enough to choke on. Damien stood, his movements deliberate, and crossed the room to stand in front of me. You can't keep doing this, he said quietly. Doing what? I asked, though we both knew the answer. Pretending, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. You deserve more than this, Ellie. You deserve to be happy. The sincerity in his voice broke something in me, and for a moment, I let myself believe him. I let myself imagine a life where things were different, where I wasn't bound by obligations and the weight of expectations. But reality came crashing back all too quickly. I can't, I whispered, my voice cracking. You don't understand. I understand more than you think, he said, his tone unwavering. I stepped back, shaking my head. Damien, this has to stop. Whatever this is, it's not right. Do you really believe that? He asked, his voice low but insistent. Or are you just telling yourself that because it's easier than facing the truth? His words struck a nerve, and I turned away, unable to look at him any longer. I think you should go, I said, my voice barely audible. For a moment I thought he might argue, but instead he stepped back. Fine, he said, his tone softening. But this isn't over, Ellie. Not for me. The days that followed were a blur. Damien made himself scarce, spending most of his time out of the house or locked in his room. Richard, oblivious as ever, went about his routine, never once questioning the shift in the air between us. I threw myself into distractions, cleaning, gardening, anything to keep my mind occupied. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memory of Damien's words or the way they'd settled deep in my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. Then, one evening, I found an envelope on the kitchen counter. My name was written on the front in Damien's familiar scrawl. I opened it with trembling hands, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. Ellie, I meant what I said. You deserve to be happy. And if that means walking away, I'll do it. But if you ever change your mind, I'll be waiting. The tears came before I could stop them, hot and unwelcome. I clutched the letter to my chest, the enormity of his words washing over me. In the end, I made my choice. I stayed. It wasn't because I didn't care about Damien. I did, more than I was willing to admit even to myself. But the weight of everything else, the promises I'd made, the life I'd built, it was too much to walk away from. Richard never noticed the change in me, or if he did, he never said anything. He went about his life as if nothing had happened, as if the ground beneath our feet hadn't shifted in ways he couldn't see. And Damien? He kept his promise. He walked away, but not entirely. There were still moments, fleeting glances, accidental touches, words left unsaid. But we both knew the line had been drawn, and crossing it again would mean losing everything. So we stayed on opposite sides of it, tethered by a bond we couldn't break but dared not name. And though I tried to tell myself it was enough, a part of me knew it never would be.